Thank you for joining us. My name is Jenny Pagel-Guile, and I am the Executive Director of the National Pancreas Foundation. Our mission is to provide hope for all of those suffering from pancreas disease through funding cutting-edge research, providing support and education, and advocating for better services and access to care. Some of the impact of the National Pancreas Foundation is awarding over 5 million grants to up-and-coming researchers to keep them in the pancreas field and moving care and treatment forward. We've endorsed over 180 centers of excellence across the country, from cancer, pancreatitis, and pediatric, recognizing that there are needs for all of our patients and, again, elevating the highest level of care. We also provide a variety of programs to volunteers, care providers, and medical professionals as well. There are many ways that you can be involved in the Pancreas Foundation, as well as several resources available online and on demand. We have the animated patient that provides detailed information about the diagnosis as well as the pancreas itself. We co-sponsor Camp Hope with Rebecca's Wish, our first pediatric pancreatitis camp in the country, and we provide nutrition support through our cookbook services and online webinars. All of this information can be found on our website, as well as a listing of all of our active centers of excellence. Across the country, we have over 30 chapters. These are volunteers and individuals who provide support to each other. They also provide grassroots efforts at tabling at local health fairs, providing fundraising support and education. They also sit in on advocacy calls at the local and national level. We would love to have you join us if you are able, or you can start a chapter in your community. Reach out to our staff if you would like to receive more information. Again, we have a full calendar of events, virtual and in person, on our website. We have an assortment of galas across the country. We have patient education events coming up in person, as well as medical professional events. And again, all of our webinars are available on demand online. The best way to stay up to date is to subscribe to our monthly newsletter. We also are on a variety of social media, so make sure that you follow us and share with your community and peers. We would love to have you join us. I would now like to welcome and introduce our speaker, Dr. Balogun. He is a medical oncologist specializing in gastrointestinal tumors, including pancreatic and colorectal cancers. He completed his undergraduate degree at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and then completed his MD and PhD at the University of Chicago with a dissertation on DNA repair. At New York University, he trained in internal medicine and then completed his hematology oncology fellowship. He subsequently joined Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City. His research involves a better understanding of the molecular basis of these pancreatic and colorectal cancers, with an emphasis in the underrepresented populations.
Thank you, Jenny, for that wonderful introduction. I'm excited to be here and to discuss a very important and dear topic about clinical trials, more specifically diversity and the importance of diversity in clinical trials. I wanted to start with a very basic question. What is a clinical trial and why is it important in medical research? So a clinical trial is essentially a process by which medications or interventions or tests that have shown promise at various levels are now being introduced to human beings. Essentially, every test and every medication that we use today went through the process of clinical trials, and this is how we continue to advance medicine and healthcare in general. Some of the trials, are the ones I will speak more often about, are therapeutic trials that are actually using treatments or drugs to treat diseases. And in this case, more relevant to us, pancreatic cancer or pancreas diseases. They typically have gone through what we call a preclinical phase. For a drug to get to the stage of a clinical trial, it has already been shown in the lab or in non-human subjects that this is working. There's a promise that it's safe and it's effective. This is how we learn about ways to make treatment or management of diseases better, but also introduce better, newer drugs into the system that can help improve how we manage these diseases. We have seen an improvement in how we manage diseases and subsequently also a prolongation or increase of overall survival when as we manage several of these uh, pancreas diseases that we treat. There are several phases in which there's a clinical trial. So I did mention about the preclinical phase, which is what happens before it actually becomes a clinical trial. But when it's in a clinical trial, there are things we think of. As you can imagine, the first question is usually, no matter how promising it looked previously or how safe it looked, is it safe in humans? So phase one trial, the early phase of a trial, really the primary question that it's trying to address is this drug safe? Importantly, even when we're thinking primarily about whether a drug is safe, it's important with clinical trials that the doses of the drug that are being used are reasonable, make sense, and they could be beneficial. So simply because we're looking primarily at safety doesn't mean efficacy is fully ignored, is totally ignored. We're also looking at another level at the efficacy of the drug. A drug that has gone through phase one and deemed to be safe goes into phase two, where the key question in general is, now that we've established it's safe, is it effective? Can this actually treat the disease we're talking about? Pancreatic cancer is what I go back to because that's what I treat a lot of. It is safe in patients with pancreatic cancer. Now the next question in phase two is it actually doing anything to treat the disease? A phase three, what comes after we've seen that it's effective in treating the cancer, essentially and generally compares it to what we currently have. It's safe, phase one. It's effective, phase two. How does it compare with what we have currently? Phase three. That also gives us a sense of where that drug fits in our treatment options for managing different diseases. What kinds of diseases or conditions were usually studied in clinical trials? And we can pretty much say all types of disease or conditions. In order for us to know better how to diagnose, manage, treat different diseases, they all go through clinical trials. But understandably, not all trials will end up going through that because of different reasons. If some diseases are very rare, we may not have enough time or enough people that have those diseases to get through all those phases of trial. In pancreas disease, some of them are very common. So diabetes is a very common pancreas disease. Some of them are rarer. Pancreatic cancer is a rarer uh, disease of the pancreas, but all still very significant. Because of the significance way in which they affect our lives, it's important that we get better treatments for them. We have a lot of great drugs that are helping to treat a lot of the pancreas diseases we have, but we know we have a lot of room for growth. We have a lot of room for improvement. With the less than optimal outcomes that we get across the board for pancreas disease, and some of them pretty bad outcomes, we can look back and say we've come a long way. But the truth is we see where we are and know we still have a long way to go. So that makes clinical trials very important in the management of pancreas diseases. Now, how are these trials designed? One good thing about trials is for a clinical trial, it's designed by the several people and several processes that are involved in it. And the reason why that's the case is comes down to the safety of the patients, the safety of the participants. I cannot decide, does this drug that I made in my personal lab or in my home, I think it's great. I'm just going to start giving it to people. You need others to vet what I did. People who do not have an interest in it. I obviously believe very strongly in the drug that I designed because I worked so hard on it and I'm passionate about it. But you need people who are not as, who are removed from it to actually look objectively and say, well, is this reasonable? Is this going to be helpful for patients? And how should patients get this? Even up to the point of how often patients get these drugs. Is it something that they can take once a day as a pill? Is it something they have to take every 2 hours? Every 2 hours for a pill may not be reasonable. So we have to find ways to make it better for the patient. But there are different levels at which clinical trial designs go through. So in summary, there are the people who are the group that actually design the trial of the drug. Then there are several regulatory boards, both in the institution and even on the uh, regulatory federal government level, that includes the FDA, which actually the trials have to get approved through, have to get through in order for them to become successful drugs that are marketed and available to everyone. One final question that I get related quite often is a placebo or blindness of a trial or the randomization nature of a trial. So what does it mean when a trial is randomized or when it's blinded? When a trial is randomized, it really says that no one gets to decide a trial that has multiple arms to it. So let's assume there are two arms for a trial. One arm gets drug A, the other arm gets drug B. No one gets to randomly decide where a patient or a participant goes into. So I don't get to choose and say, you go into arm A, you go into arm B. It's done through an algorithm that randomly assigns people to the different arms. Now, when you talk about a trial being blinded, it also means that in some instances, whether someone gets arm A or arm B, certain people don't know. So if I, the provider, I, the doctor, I don't know whether my patient is getting the drug in arm A or arm B, that means I am blinded to what they're receiving. And same thing, in some instances, it applies to the provider and or the patient, potentially even everyone involved in the trial. Another third point is placebo. And what placebo means, which a lot of people are more familiar with, is essentially not the drug or uh, an alternative to the drug that's not the treatment. So if there's a drug in arm A, but then the people in arm B, rather than get the same drug, if we're trying to figure out if the drug is better than doing nothing at all, they essentially get a look-alike drug that doesn't have the same effects as the regular drug. Now, all these things, why are they important? Why do they matter? They all matter because one of the key things we want to learn from a trial is this new drug, this new thing that we're excited about, does it work? Does it make sense? Because we don't want a drug that doesn't make as much sense or work to be approved. We want to be able to catch them and stop them. And all these designs that go into the trial, the randomization, the blinding, the placebo, they're not all used, but sometimes they're used. And the point of that is to make sure that to protect the integrity of the answer you get to that question of whether this drug really works as much as we believe it does. If I know, if I have a drug and I'm biased and I think the drug is great, and I know which arm the drug is in, I may, without knowing, I may subconsciously take patients who are feeling a little stronger and feeling healthier and put them in that arm and put patients who are more tired or weaker into the other arm. And that way I'm favoring the drug. In the end, the study is going to make it look like the trial will look like the drug works, but it really didn't work because I favored and put the healthier people in the arm of the drug. That's really why that's why all these terms come into the design of the trial. One thing to note is that, and going back to the design of the trials, is in spite of all the things that need to be done to make sure that the trial integrity is protected, the number one thing is still making sure that patients and participants who engage in a trial are getting fair, ethical, moral treatment. No one who has good options for treatment will be or should be getting a placebo just for the sake of answering a question. The care for a patient's disease should not be compromised in the design of the trial. So first and foremost, before the answering of the question is making sure that all patients are treated fairly and safely when in a trial. We will talk. We will talk with one of my colleagues, Miss Gail Pantone. Gail Pantone is a clinical trial nurse that helps in the management of patients on various clinical trials. She completed her undergraduate degree in biology at Montclair State University. However, her love for nursing led her to an undergraduate degree in nursing at California State University in Northridge, across the country. And also went ahead to complete a master's degree in nursing education at Western Governors University. She's currently a research nurse at Memorial Sloan Kettering and is very passionate about patient education, believing that it is crucial for patients to understand or advocate for themselves. Welcome, Ms. Pantone.
Thank you, Dr. Bailey.
So, jumping right into it, with your experience as a clinical trial nurse working really shoulder to shoulder right there with the patients as they go through trials, uh, I wanted to ask who can participate in a trial and how participants are selected. And feel free, even before answering that question, to talk about how you how you engage in clinical trials with patients so that our audience can get a sense of your your proximity, which I see to patients going through trials.
I'm sure. Thank you so much for having me and allowing me to participate. As a clinical trials nurse, we definitely work hand in hand with the team. And when I say it takes a team, it definitely takes a team. The way different facilities, different medical facilities or institutions may organize their teams a little differently, but basically for me in my current role, I am paired with a doctor who participates very actively in research. The doctor also sees regular patients who are receiving standard of care treatment. So I am the nurse that takes care strictly of for the research patients, while she has another nurse who takes care of the standard of care patients. In my role, we work very closely hand in hand with not just the doctor, but different teams of research staff who help to make the trial work. You have ones who just do documentation. They audit, they ensure that all the data is there and is communicated to whomever is sponsoring the trial. We have teams that help us day to day, making sure that whatever documents I collect while I'm meeting the patient is collected and passed on to the different team members. I work closely with a nurse practitioner who is paired with a doctor while they see patients to indicate where they are in the trial, what cycle they are at, what we need for this visit. Are there any issues going on? The patient called and said, "Hey, I'm having a fever. What do I do?" Um, and I like to think of a clinical research nurse. We really help to keep communication flowing between patients and the team, whether it be the administrative documentation side or the active side with providers like nurse practitioners and doctors. So it's like a traffic controller in a little bit of way. We have to be very well versed in the trial, kind of knowing the details. How, if a patient says, "Hey, my local doctor wants me to start an antibiotic," we have to know, stop, let me get the name of that first so I can check with the protocol, which is literally the big document that guides everything we do for a trial. Let me check that it's okay and that it's not going to either diminish the action of the drug you're taking or make it work too well. Or, again, I'm having a fever, stop. Let me check and see what symptoms do you have? How have you been feeling? What have you taken? How long has it been? Then I'll communicate with the team, hey, this is what's going on with the patient. Do we want them to come in and kind of get some labs, take a look at them and make sure this is nothing that, doesn't need to be escalated to an admission or further testing. So it's a lot of juggling, but it's quite an honor to be able to be hands in with both the team and the patients. And then to follow up on your second question, taking all of that, again, it's communication. Most doctors are at least I would have to say, I work in a Sloan Kettering is quite amazing because most of the doctors kind of know what their patient might be able to be suited with a trial. So we'll look at the patient and say, okay, the protocol has criteria, inclusion criteria. It says they have to be a certain age, they have to have a certain diagnosis, their kidney function has to meet a certain level of functionality, or their hemoglobin has to be a certain level. They cannot have had any recent XYZ in the past 3 years prior to joining the trial. So that can be several pages long, what you have to check off. Yes, yes, yes. And then there are other criteria that is called exclusion criteria. They cannot have had any recent treatment within the last 6 months for this cancer. They have to have cardiac function that meets a certain level. So we have to kind of go through with the doctor the history of the patient, screening activities, could be scans or lab work to make sure that they fit the inclusion that is required to join the trial. And so if we are fortunate to have all the inclusion criteria met and none of the exclusion criteria is applicable, we then get all that paperwork and all the tests that we've done and all that documentation, and it gets sent off to the sponsor. They will go through it themselves to make sure, yes, it meets all the criteria, and then they will let us know, okay, great, this patient does qualify to join this trial. So it is very important that we have that criteria. I know for some patients it can be heartbreaking because it's one thing out of 11, 12, 20 pages that they do meet, and just one thing is the thing that stops. But it is really, as hard as it is to have patients understand it, it really is for their safety.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And I think the lots of great points that you made there. And picking up on one of the last things you said with the inclusion and exclusion criteria, it does seem like with clinical trials, while we do get excited about the potential for the benefit, there's the appreciation that you have to make sure when you expose people to the risk of any medicines we see, there's a real potential for benefit. So no point having someone in a trial if the disease that the drug is targeting is not what they have, or the little fine details. Um, so that's always a good point to raise. And like yeah, I've also had experiences over and over, like you just described, where patients feel disappointed that they're not
Yeah,
eligible. But in the end, the safety comes first. Um,
exactly.
so how do because healthcare overall, healthcare information is very important to us all, and our safety, obviously. How do researchers within these clinical trials protect the safety and the rights of participants?
That's always a good question. Again, I would say the first step is this inclusion exclusion criteria that we use to see if they qualify. Once they're on the trial, I don't know if people realize just all the hoops and doors and locks that have to be unopened or closed to make sure that is put in place to ensure patient safety above all things. So one of the things is starting a trial, there can be several things depending on the phase of the trial. As you had discussed before, there may be a lot more watchful monitoring things that may go on then other times, which equals more visits, maybe more labs, maybe more scans, such like that. One couple of good examples to present. I really love, and I don't, again, helping patients to understand just how many layers there are to ensuring their safety on trials. For one thing, I think the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, is a key. I love the fact that it's a second layer of safety. Just shortly to explain, as you could probably do better than I, once you have a sponsor, they have their own team, and they make sure they tell you exactly what to do. And this is the evidence that they provide to show that it's safe. Before an institution like a hospital or can go ahead and conduct the trial on patients that are seen at that facility, the IRB, Institutional Review Board, does a whole nother scrub. Is this safe? Are there any questions? Are there any hesitancies about what we've been presented that we would rather be changed to make sure this is absolutely safe for patients? Any double checks that are needed, any triple checks that need to be added. So that's a big one right there at the very, to me, root and foundation of any clinical trial. Beyond that, on a day-to-day basis, it is, part of it would be me as a research nurse, always checking in with my patients. When they come in for visits, they're going to have, most of them, almost always labs done. And then I'll see them, how are you doing? We haven't seen you in the last 2 weeks since your last visit. What has happened? Did you follow up with the cardiologist? Because we noted that your blood pressure has been consistently high. Did you check in with your pulmonologist? You had that cough that just doesn't seem to be going away. How are you dosing? Are you having any issues dosing? Explain to me how you're dosing so I can make sure that it is the optimal way to be dosing. And if there are any questions, are there any questions at all? Again, just as I gave the example before, any new medication started, any situations going on that we need to make a note of, remember, call us with any issues so that we can at least be actively participating in making sure you're safe. And so those are just a few of the multiple ways to keep patients safe. So we always have access to pharmacists who know how these drugs might interact with other drugs. And we always have access to the what we call principal investigators who run the trials at these different facilities, probably like yourself and the doctor I work with, who, hey, have a question. Is this okay? What would you recommend? Going back to the sponsor, hey, just let you know, subject 10.001 has been having this ongoing issue. This is what we think we would like to do. Is this okay? What would you recommend? So again, I think, as you can see, communication is key to just keeping patients safe and making sure that these trials are for benefit, not for harm.
Thank you, Ms. Pantone. There's something that jumped out to me from all you have just said, and I'm going to, try to summarize it and pose it back to you. It sounds like when people are on trials, when participants or patients are part of a clinical trials, there are lots and lots of eyes on them. Yes,
Yes.
many people that get, we're based on the fact that we work at the cancer center and we treat cancer patients. So using that as an example, while our cancer patients in general have a whole team, always have a team working on them, it sounds like in clinical trials, that team gets boosted even more. So because, and I think it's important to emphasize that because people are always worried about clinical trials being the safety, am I a guinea pig? And but so tell me from your experience, um, what you see in terms of just the level of eyes and people that are watching you in a clinical trial versus standard of care.
It is incredible. And you summarized it perfectly when you said the level. It is, again, one of the things that I love about the way that we conduct trials. And it's not even like a choice to have those eyes. Those eyes are embedded into the very foundation of trials. So, for example, I will see a patient, I'll document, the doctor or the provider will document, and then those things get sent off to the person who's going to scrutinize. Did you check this box? What does that box mean? Were they feeling well or weren't they feeling well? And I'll have to call the patient back, hey, we're just checking, just to make sure, or something as simple as we have on some trials most trials I do, you have to do CT scans at certain intervals. It could be every 3 months, it could be every 6 months, whatever the protocol indicates. That CT scan is then completely read by a radiologist who to provide an update on how is this patient doing from a radiological standpoint. Is there any evidence of progression of disease? Is there evidence that they are having a complete remission? Is there anything, scans are done, or I will look at them and say, okay, Dr. Thompson, I know you're going to look at the scan, but just to let you know, it shows that some new nodule is found or there were opacities in the lungs. I'm going to call the patient and find out if they've been recently sick. It's that kind of, again, I don't mean to sound quirky, but teamwork that really makes it beyond anything I can say, just a total respect for how we do clinical trials. And unfortunately, I think one of the things we do acknowledge is that in the past, clinical trials have not been exactly safe for patients, and it has been, of course, biased in some ways and not full benefit for the participants. And it's unfortunate that those things have happened, but if there's anything good that came out of it, is the level of scrutiny and watchfulness and monitoring that is done at any facility who is trying to run a clinical trial. And if not, it has led to the benefits of having very structured, very exact, conducting of trials to benefit patients on a whole. If I can give one example, I was involved with a phase 1 trial. I had a patient on it, just started. And for this trial, we had maybe 2 or 3 patients on it already. One patient ended up being admitted for some symptoms that we weren't really sure. Could it have been due to the medicine? What, could it have been due to something else? At the moment that they said, you know what, this could be the medicine, it was amazing to see how quickly things went. Communication was started with the sponsor. Patients were called to stop dosing until we figure out what's going on. Sponsor and all the PIs, who are the primary investigators, met very quickly, decided, okay, let's hold and reduce until we know for sure, what other measures we have to put in place to ensure that this drug is safe. And it literally took place within hours. I was, to me as a nurse, I was blown away by just, wow. If you think it, yes, we monitor. No, this was so much the evidence that there's so many eyes watching, and the overall, again, purpose and goal that we do within trials is for patient safety, the maximum patient safety that we can ensure.
Good, good, good. Thanks for sharing that example too. So to pivot a little bit, why is it important to have diverse participants in a clinical trial?
Very good question. One thing we know as we advance in the understanding of humans and the body, and the fact that various ethnic groups can respond to the same medicine in different ways. So having a diverse patient body to participate on clinical trials, it can be helpful to help us identify those important differences that could exist between various ethnic groups to make sure that the overall drug is safe for patients, that it provides the maximum efficacy, meaning efficiency. It's doing the best benefit it can with the least side effects that it can do, which is all summarized as being safe for patients. And that is a very important part of why it really is important to have more especially minority ethnic groups participate in trials, because our knowledge base, I'm sure you can speak to this more than I can, we still have yet to have a more robust understanding of how different diseases and then subsequently different treatments can best affect, hopefully, these different ethnic groups.
Thank you, and I can't agree anymore with you in that it's who we are, what we eat, where we're from, where we live.
Yes.
Those are all things that could affect disease and response, and being as diverse as possible and making sure all groups are represented helps everybody because we better understand those drugs and how they work to help us all. Are there, and along those lines, are there any barriers that you notice that make it harder for some communities to participate in clinical trials?
Definitely. I think where we, or recognition of what social determinants of health are, and the growing recognition that those impact the health of communities and individuals significantly. And I'll take an example. Especially on a phase 1 trial, you're going to have for the most part, you're going to have frequent visits to check what we would say is the pharmacokinetics of the drug. Once you swallow that drug, what does it do in your body? Does it peak at a certain time? Does it get its lowest point at a certain time? Does it affect your laboratory work, like your complete blood count or so you'll find and I can give an example on a particular phase 1 study that I was active with. The patients had to have several visits within a 2-week period. um, 2 visits the first week, then 1 visit every week thereafter. These were long days, not just an hour or so. These were 8, 9 hour days where at different time points as the day went on, either labs were collected or vitals were done or blood pressures were checked and such. And so if you think about it, one, from a standpoint of economics, if someone cannot take all that time off from work to be able to come in and meet all those visits that are required, it's likely they won't be able to participate in that trial. Or something as simple as transportation. If the medical facility where the trial is being conducted, where you have to do those visits, takes an hour's train and 2 buses to get to, how likely is that person going to be able to actually participate if that long day you're not getting out of there until probably 8, 9 o'clock at night? So it's just simple things like that, as basic as that do unfortunately present a barrier for certain communities to participate in trials. And so when I especially get to, introduce to a patient when they're starting, I usually try to get an understanding of what their life is. Do you still work? Do you watch your grandkids? How would you get here? Did you drive yourself? Are you able to drive? How flexible is your time? Do you not drive at night because you don't like, you can't see it well in the Those are all things I've had to, I've learned to ask, because those things influence just how likely a person, no matter how willing they want to be on the trial, how likely is it that it will be feasible for them to participate on the trial. So I hate to say it's adding a little bit of realism to it, in addition to the hope that a trial can offer. But the stress that I've seen some patients have to deal with trying to comply with the very stringent guidelines that we have to go by with the trial can sometimes be more stressful than the disease itself. And it's just trying to make sure they understand, if you want to talk to your job, we could provide a letter just explaining, can you give them a half a day, or we'll try to get appointments really, really early so that you can get out on time to get to work. Or to meet the schedule of someone who might be picking you up. So stuff like that, we really do try to make a priority in assessing to be able to help the patient, participate if they can. But it is, for quite a few patients, I'm sure it is a barrier.
Yeah, unfortunately. And I know there are efforts to make trials more accessible, whether it's in regard to having multiple sites or locations rather than just one central location that makes it harder for everyone to come to. Um, but more specifically within the trials, I'm just trying to learn from your experience too. Within trials, do you find that some trials may have some additional support to help participants? And how do you have a do you notice, do you have advice for potential participants just in regards to, like, you mentioned transportation? If there's a support, is that something they should talk about or ask about? What kind of support do you see that clinical trials may have that are not very obvious upfront?
Okay, good question. It all depends on the trials. So I'll go from it from a specific trial perspective, but then overall, again, the facility, of course, that we work with, Memorial Sloan Kettering, we have been very fortunate to have social workers who we can reach out to and explain the situation. This patient's going to be on a trial. They're going to have an issue with transportation to get here. Is there anything, any kind of funding or foundation that could assist us in at least getting them transportation? And yes, we have thankfully been able to be assisted that way. From the clinical trial itself, from a sponsor perspective, at least in my experience, not all trials offer what we call financial support, where it will assist with you getting an Uber so you can come to the visit, or at least give a voucher for a meal if you're going to have a very long day, like a 9-10 hour day. But for the most part, I would say this, it's definitely something that patients should not absolutely say, oh, it's not, it's impossible. Ask it and let's try to work together to find a solution. The one thing I can say is there's so many different entities and individuals who, when put together, we can make things work. And it's just, again, not just assuming it's impossible. What's the situation? What flexibility can you bring as a patient? Let me see if we can be flexible to meet you where you need to be met. Instead of coming in for labs, maybe you can get it locally and just make sure the report gets to us and we'll call for that. Things like that. Let's talk to the sponsor. If they can't make the CT, would you be willing to have it done outside of where the research trial is being done? Or even short-term disability. I've filled out lots of short-term disability forms. I've gotten very good at it. But things that patients actually don't realize they could ask for. And it's just flexibility in work schedule and such like that. So again, I would say just don't assume it's impossible. Let's ask a question and we'll do our best to try to make it work.
I 100% agree. Whenever we're faced with those barriers and obstacles, the least that anyone and potential participants or patients can do is ask. You just never know
Exactly.
what can be made to happen. Now,
True.
how can the public trust that clinical trial results are reliable and unbiased?
Oh boy. I would say, for at least my part, and I'm actually going to turn that back to you and ask for your opinion on that. But from my standpoint, even just the previous questions you've asked, how do we know it's safe for patients? What what framework is in place to make sure things are safe for patients? Just an IRB, an institutional review board, and the inclusion exclusion criteria, and the multiple eyes that are looking at that one patient, making sure that if this is what's required for one patient, this is required for all the other patients, that there's no hidden bias that's coming into play to make it not as unbiased or reliable as it could be. And so I would say just the framework of how we conduct trials now alone, if if people understood just again how many hoops and doors have to be unlocked and double checks have to be done, just the framework of how a clinical trial is done now, to me, is the best evidence of reliability and unbiased, results. But then I'll ask you, Dr. Balogun, where do you see it? I know there's quite a lot of unfortunate mistrust with medicine right now. So where do you see us in terms of clinical trials in that atmosphere?
Yeah, and I think like you said, so this also goes back to some of the things I had mentioned earlier on in terms of the trial design and whether it's randomized or blinded, a lot of that is to remove the bias. You don't want someone to put their finger on the scale intentionally or unintentionally. Maybe with the best intentions. And I use the example, if I designed the drug, I really believed in the drug. I subconsciously I may put my finger on the scale. So maybe that's why
Yes,
perhaps I shouldn't know who's getting the drug or who's not getting the drug. So, or I
exactly.
shouldn't be the one deciding who's getting the drug or who's not getting the drug. And you don't even have to be the person that designs it. You just have to be uh, someone who's taking care of patients that are dealing with this bad disease, and you just really want something that works, something that's good, and you may be biased. So, sound trial design that removes as much of this bias is important, which is why the IRB, a lot of this regulatory bodies, that's their role. Um, but also even picking up on something that you said, the ensuring that the clinical trials have proper representation, diverse representation. If we only look at something in a narrow definition of in a narrow group, it's not, we don't learn as much as we can,
Mhm.
and we don't optimize the results that we can get applicable to that group and to everyone else. So making sure that we have diverse participants in a clinical trial is another thing that really helps to make
Yes.
that result viable, I think. Something that patients do ask me re- often is they may be interested in a clinical trial, and where do they start? How do they find a clinical trial? And I always admit that it's not the easiest thing. It's a very complicated process, and the primary website that we use, the clinicaltrials.gov, has
Yep.
pretty much all trials there, but it's very that means all the trials are there. So it's very hard to find something. It's not as easy. But definitely talking to their team, their providers is always a key first step. So whether it's talking to their providers. And and in that case, when someone indicates an interest in clinical trials or along those lines, what would you, and this comes to you and you have to have a conversation with them, what kinds of questions would you encourage the patients or their families to ask before enrolling in a trial? What things should they think about? What things should they consider when they come out to you and say, hey, Miss Panton, I'm thinking about this clinical trial?
Great question. I would say the first question would be, what are the where does that clinical trial kind of settle out in my options? What options do I have? And I know it's hard sometimes for patients to hear us say, we can't tell you what to do, we can recommend. I know sometimes patients are so desperate to just have a clear path, but it definitely is, again, for the patient's benefit and, of course, caregiver benefit to hear all the information that they can. So, is this trial considered? Um, in some cases, I've had quite a few patients where they've been through several lines of treatment, meaning for this disease, they have probably had 3, 4 different medications, different at different times that they've used in an effort to manage this disease. So, you know, if it's an example like that where what are my options now? There doesn't seem to be any commercial based treatments out there. So this trial is kind of the best for me to try at this time. Then questions like that should include, what do I, what is the path? How long will we try this? What are we looking for to determine if this is going in the right way or this is continuing to be a benefit for me? Or how often will we monitor? What will we use to monitor to see if it is being a benefit to me? Will that be scans? Will that be lab work? Will that be physical exams, or just the patient reporting, hey, I feel fine, I have no side effects, or I'm able now to get up and do a full day, whereas before I was on the couch for 6 hours a day because I just had no energy. So just basic questions like that do help, I feel, to give a broader picture of what a patient can keep in mind to know, is this going, is this will this be a benefit for me? What risks are there to me going on this treatment? What are some of the things, the side effects that I might have to worry about? The drug itself may be helpful. The treatment may help to manage the disease, but if you say developed really bad neuropathy, neuropathic pain, and now that consumes everything that you have to do, where is the benefit and risk in starting that? So I think being very clear and being transparent about the various side effects is another thing to keep in mind. How going on a clinical trial, as I said before, what is your life right now? What are the demands of your life? What are the priorities that you hold in your life? Is it to be able to get to your kid's game or be able to pick them up, or you're a single parent and you have to be the sole caregiver, such like that? Those are important things. How will you get there? How will you are you able to take time off from work to meet the demands of the time requirement that this trial will do? If you go on short-term disability, will that impact your household's budget and income? So there are quite a few questions that, if it were me, I would definitely advise patients to think about. And again, another thing too is some trials, you actually pay for the drug because it's a commercial drug that's already been approved and such, and then it's a part of a trial to see if maybe in combination with other drugs, how well does it work? Some trials, the drug is provided. That's another thing. Insurance. I know, unfortunately, people think clinical trials are completely free. And I have to say the transparent part of it is that you may have to, go through insurance for certain things. So then that's a deductible or a copay. You're having more visits, you're having more lab work done, you're having more scans done. How will that impact me? What's the financial cost of being on this trial for me? So those are just a few of the realistic questions I would say
Mm-hmm.
to consider. But again, the whole point I would say to ask in those questions is making sure there's hopefully reducing any unknown stressors, because I've unfortunately had patients who, didn't quite hear when, we explained this is going to be run through insurance, because per insurance, they feel that you only need one scan every 2 years for this disease. We're asking for 3 more. And I've got a bill and this copay I wasn't expecting to pay. So, it can be quite stressful with those unawareness of those things. So ask as many questions. And again,
Yeah.
hopefully organizations like National Pancreas Foundation can help to connect people with different entities that can answer those questions or give some advice or guidance, such as this discussion that we're having today.
Yes, yes. Thank you. And yes, thanks because NPF National Pancreas Foundation does have a lot of resources that would help with all pancreas diseases. So thank you for that answer. And I know you've given us a couple of really good examples already, but I was wondering if you could um, tie it up for us with a success story that you have or had seen of a clinical trial. Do this to give the people listening hope and some idea of real world impacts?
Oh yes, the first, a couple of them, but the first one that comes to mind is actually a patient I'm currently taking care of. Again, someone who had gone through several lines of treatment. So I want to say this one was number 5, and of course it was reflected in blood work. Hemoglobin was very low, having to have multiple transfusions almost weekly. And that impacts your life. It impacts your availability and always having to come in for labs and, oh, it's low, let's go in for an infusion, come back for labs. And so the nice part is that thankfully qualified for a trial, a phase 1 trial, thankfully got on the trial, able to tolerate the treatment. And within a couple of cycles, cycles are the interval of time that we measure the trial by. So a cycle for this trial is 4 weeks. So every 4 weeks we'll see this patient. And thankfully, just after a few trials, hemoglobin started bumping up enough where we didn't have to transfuse every week. Gradually didn't have to watch the labs multiple times a week. So that was just less visits, less injections, and it just makes it's just so rewarding to see it be a benefit to their everyday life. Being able to take care of a loved one who was sick, that was a huge priority for them. Being able to make it through the day without being exhausted, literally being able to, guess what, I was able to walk to the mailbox today, something they hadn't been able to do for months. So it's just the basic things like that. I took the dog for a walk down the street. I actually made it past my driveway. Just hearing patients give feedback like that is just, that summarizes why we do what we do.
That's very good to hear. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing that story. And thank you for your time and for all the knowledge that you have spread forth here about clinical trials. It was very helpful to get to speak with someone who works hand in hand with the patients.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you again for allowing me to participate and, just share the love we have for this and the love we have for our patients.
Thank you.